This is Nuntiatoria, traditional Catholic news and commentary from the Old Roman Apostolate.
Ad maiorem Dei gloria. Oremus. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sicut erat in principio et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Pater noster, qui es in celi, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra. Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, et dimita nobis debita nostra, sicut nos dimitimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Carissimi beloved in Christ, welcome to this live questions and answers with yours truly. Now, some of you I know are regular viewers and followers of the channel. And so, although it was some short notice, you will know that the purpose of these Q&A, or today's Q&A, is to hopefully reflect on yesterday's discussion on Old Romans Unscripted, or Monday's spiritual conference regarding the cone consecrations, or indeed further back to almost a week ago last Friday, when I gave a conference about the situation with the cone. Now, I have some questions already that I will endeavour to answer, but if you have a question, please put it in the comments, and I will see it, and I will answer it as I am able. You might also, as well as a greeting, thank you, William, good evening to you, as well as a greeting, you might put where you are watching from, because it's always interesting to know how far and wide we're able to reach through this medium. It was fascinating yesterday to see that we had viewers as far afield as the Philippines, Australia, South Africa, as well as the United States, places in Europe, and of course here in the United Kingdom. So, you know, despite the fact that we are uber traditionalists, nonetheless, modern technology can be employed usefully and intelligibly and prudently to fulfill the mission of our apostolate, which is ultimately, of course, to preserve and promote tradition and the traditional Catholic faith. Okay, so Father William. So Father William joins us from France and asks how should we respond to people, or how should old Romans respond to people who now say we are excommunicated, even though groups can't be excommunicated? Yes, that's a good question. And for old Roman clergy, aside from bishops, this is an important point, old Roman clergy who aren't bishops, but nonetheless, of course, are Catholic priests, though estranged from Rome, they are technically suspended if they were Catholics. The only old Romans who are theoretically excommunicated are the bishops, for the same reason that the 4 new bishops for the SSPX were excommunicated. That is, of course, for receiving consecration, episcopal consecration, without a papal mandate. That, according to the 1983 Code of Canon Law, incurs an automatic excommunication late sententiae, reserved to the Holy See. But even then, the SSPX, of course, as you will no doubt know, are responding to the excommunication of their bishops through a canonical recourse, through which they will hope to provide their mitigating circumstances. But of course, they were issued with a decree of excommunication. Now, in canon law, even a late sententiae excommunication, if it hasn't been formally decreed, it has an effect and it doesn't have an effect. In the sense that if I, as an old Roman bishop, were to seek reconciliation with Rome as an individual, then my case would have to take into account the late sententiae penalty for having received episcopal consecration without a papal mandate. But if I were an old Roman priest reconciling, then my situation would be the same as that of all the SSPX priests, which is to say, having received sacred ordination outside the juridical structure of the Roman Church, one is then suspended. So technically, SSPX priests and Old Roman and other independent Catholic priests invariably have incurred the sentence of suspension. But as the questioner points out, and as I reflected upon last week, penalties only apply to individuals, and it matters whether an individual has been specifically named. In other words, that a canonical decree has been issued, so that for the purposes of administering the sacraments, supplied jurisdiction is given automatically to the administration, the sacramental administration of priests, though they may be suspended, but who have not been formally decreed, that is, by name, individually, as having incurred the suspension. And it's an interesting conundrum, we might say, of canon law, but nonetheless, that is the case. And of course, that is how Old Romans and SSPX and other independent clergy have been operating under for the last 60 years and more. So technically, unless one has been individually and personally by name decreed excommunicate, one is never excommunicated by being classed as a group or as being within a group, which is why the excommunications of Icone only refer to the 6 bishops actually named in the decree, and despite the wording of the explanatory note that accompanied it, giving the impression that all the other sacred ministers belonging to the society and even the faithful were excommunicate and schismatic. In fact, they are not. And each one, if they personally, individually decided to reconcile with the local ordinary or directly to the Pope, their cases will be treated individually rather than collectively. See, in canon law, it's not even necessarily assumed that formal adherence, for example, that is referred to in the explanatory note, formal adherence supposedly to a schism itself has to be proved. It has to be proven. So for each individual person, it would have to be proved that their intention was wholly schismatic. So for society priests or old Roman priests, it would have to be proved that they sought ordination deliberately as an act of schism, which of course, for the majority of old Roman and society and other independent Catholic priests, is not the case. Not the case at all. Invariably, we have chosen the path of tradition for the sake of the church, not for our own agendas or purposes. So I hope, Father William, that answers your question, and thank you for kicking us off, as it were. And that leads me nicely on to another question that I received in advance of our Q&A now. And that is, are you defending the SSPX? I am defending the need for truthful distinctions, proportionate judgment, and canonical due process. One can believe that the consecrations were unlawful, irregular, or even imprudent without accepting every subsequent claim made about the bishops, priests, and the faithful. Defending someone's right to a fair canonical judgment is not the same as endorsing every decision that person has made. Now, obviously, as I've just explained, my situation is very akin to that of the new and the SSPX bishops. So it might be said that I have something of a vested interest with regard to this particular case. But aside from that, my concern is purely, and the reason why this Q&A session and the other previous broadcasts about Econ, my concern is that fairness and justice is done. One of the things that has irked me no end has been the sudden explosion of canon lawyers, in inverted commas, on social media, pronouncing everybody excommunicated or schismatic or condemned to hell or consigned to the hellfire, etc. That that is both unfair, it's calumnious, it's unproven. It's not how canon law works, and it's not how the law of the church works. Canon law as a legal system, by the way, is a very fair and equitable system. It errs toward favouring the penitent or the one who has committed the misdemeanor, in the sense that canon law is very careful to provide mitigation, to allow mitigation to be presented or argued, which is, unlike many other legal systems. There's usually, a just legal system would ordinarily provide the opportunity to explain one's actions or to give a defense of oneself. But as we know, that varies state to state, nation to nation, and but in ecclesial canon law, in our legal system, the legal system of the Latin Rite, and the Eastern Rite too, the there is greater, shall we say, favour or leniency toward enabling an accused to give an account and a defence of themselves. Merciful, we might say, a merciful approach. And again, it's important to remember, especially for those who seem so willing to condemn other Catholics to hell, the highest principle and enshrined in canon law itself is the salvation of souls. And so when one is adjudicating in canon law, one is supposed to have in the forefront of one's mind the ultimate good of the other, to have in mind the salvation of the soul that is being judged, that has been accused. So as I say, I'm not necessarily about defending the society, even though I have great respect and admiration for the society itself. I agree with the society on most things, but I'm not, I'm in no way an official or any kind of formal apologist for the society. But one of the wonderful things about the Catholic faith and about canon law and about the church is, contrary to the way that many people behave today, it is open to reason, and it is all about reason. Doctrine is all about reason. It's all about appealing to reason. The great distinction between ourselves as creatures created by God from other creatures is that humanity has the possibility to rationate and think outside the context of empirical existence. We're able to think abstractly, to philosophize, to theorize, and doctrine and the practice and purpose and discipline of the church is to aid and facilitate that unique trait in creation which is ours as human beings. And of course, one of the great concerns about the church, particularly in the last 60 years, has been the breakdown of apparent reason in the way that people both think and behave. If you've ever tried to read Morius Laetitia, or trying to understand Fiducia Supplicans, you will know what I mean. In comparison to other encyclicals and historic teaching documents of the church, these are about as clear as mud. And that, that is all part of the crisis, I would say, in the church today, which sadly, of course, is a mirror and a reflection of the crisis in our world, well, particularly in our Western societies, where many people seem to have lost all sense and sensibility, and particularly the power of reason, and of plain common sense, which is why, certain popular ideologies, are unscientific. They defy empirical test and evidence, and yet so many people fall under their sway, are seemingly persuaded by them, and usually, of course, through emotive rhetoric and so-called arguments. Everything today is about emotions, and the problem with emotion, of course, as anyone who has been deeply grieved, deeply affected by injustice, by great sorrow, by grief. The trouble with emotion, especially when it's concentrated, is that one is unable really to otherwise think and behave rationally. Again, when one is consumed by anger or by lust or by love, even unrequited love, our theatres and cinemas are full, and our bookshelves are full of plays and stories of how emotion, how when we succumb to emotion, we lose all reason. The greatest tragic love stories, the greatest or the most awful murders, etc., have all been driven really by emotion. And I'm always telling people in catechesis, and it's not an easy thing, I admit, for people to take on board, but especially I think spiritually it's very important. Be wary of emotions. Be wary of emotions. Don't use emotions to make decisions, great or important or significant decisions about things. We often hear people talk about gut instinct, and there is something to be said about that. We all have a sixth sense, as it were, about different about things, but we ought to use reason, and this is one of the arguments about evangelical practices or charismatic practices that again appeal very heavily to emotion. And it's often observed that people may in thousands respond to an altar call, as they call it, and having been appealed to emotively and responding emotively, go up and have a great conversion experience. I'm not saying that all those experiences are bunkum, but it is a recognized phenomena that a very small percentage of those conversions materialize into anything concrete and sensible afterwards. And I know this through anecdotal conversations with Protestant ministers who have, been honest enough to admit that that's often the case. There's a big It's actually technically an Anglican church here. It's one of the church plants of Holy Trinity Brompton, HTB, which is, has a name for evangelization. And not the vicar, not the current vicar, but a previous vicar. We were at a clergy fraternal, a meeting of an ecumenical meeting of clergy locally. It was around Pentecost, and everyone was, it was an informal occasion, just a light lunch, and everyone was, chatting about this, that, and everything else. And I'd heard that his church were going to perform baptisms in the sea at Pentecost. So we were talking about that, and then it's no secret that they bus students from the university campuses, which we have two huge university campuses here, two universities, in fact, but they're a little way out of the city, and so this church provides minibuses on Sunday mornings to bus students in to attend services, and numerically their Sunday attendance is impressive. So I asked him, in the conversation, how many baptisms and so on and so forth. And I asked him, and he candidly, and he answered frankly. I asked, how many, what's the percentage of those baptisms and conversions that will, mature into common Christian discipleship. And he admitted that, the percentage was very small. All sorts of reasons as to why, especially among students, because they finish their degree and move away, and the church that they go to, their local church is nothing like that which they experienced while at university. And, largely that's down to the emotion that they felt at their conversion and at the church where they were converted. But, when they go to, shall we say, a ordinary Anglican parish church, that experience is widely different. And while Alpha and small groups that this local church provides, keep people, as it were, attending, again, when these people go out or move away, and those structures, those support structures are not there, then they tend to fall away from the faith. And we see this, this is something that, as Catholics, we know. Every year at Easter Vigil, and in the last 2 years, we've been told record numbers of converts and adult baptisms take place. But actually, those numbers don't replace the number of Catholics who fall away from the faith, who lapse, or who stop practicing the faith. So, we need not be smug ourselves. We have similar issues as Protestant churches do about discipling. A large part of the crisis in the church today, as I was saying yesterday in Unscripted, a large part of the problem is the failure in catechesis, which means really a failure in discipleship, which means that, as we know from various surveys, even mass attending Catholics are not clear, not well catechized in the faith. Quite shocking survey results if you ask, average mass goers about their thoughts on contraception or abortion, on intimacy before marriage, etc. It's quite clear that there are a lot of seemingly practicing Catholics who are not actually necessarily practicing or observing everything of our faith. And that's aside from the even wider number, larger number of cultural Catholics, people who have, were born or brought up as Catholic, hit their teenage or early 20s, and left the church, lapsed. And in large part, a large part of the problem, it is, to some extent, it's always been thus, it might be said. Certainly, the same was true in the 50s, before the council. But catechesis has not been good for a while, and many Catholics actually just don't know their faith, which is why so many don't understand the situation of a cone, and don't understand the difference between papal will and papal command, don't understand the difference between disobedience and schism, even though it's clear those are two different categories in canon law, and yet, as I said before, all these experts are very keen to forget about the nuances and distinctions and just merge it all together. So in answer to the question, no, I'm not defending every SSPX judgment, but I am striving to defend truth, canonical precision, and the right of Catholics not to be condemned by seeming association. Another question I heard. Now, if you've just joined us, this is a live Q&A. So, please feel free to ask a question in the comments. It doesn't matter which platform you're watching on. I don't think your comment should come through. I'm experimenting with Substack. We should be broadcasting live on Substack as well. I don't know if we are, and I don't know how that works with the platform I'm using. I'm assuming that comments from Substack will appear on my screen here. So if you're watching from Substack, please put a hi in the comments and we'll see if it comes through. But this is an opportunity for questions about the icon consecrations, or about the crisis in the church, or about matters of the faith, or anything else that you might want or desire or appreciate my opinion about. So please feel free, and this will be now a weekly thing, as often as I am able. My intention is to try and do this weekly, and just provide an opportunity really for people to ask questions about the faith. And so if you don't have a question this week, not a problem. Mull it over and think about it and come back next week with it. But if you do have a question, please do ask in the comments, and I will do my best to answer now. Or if you've really stumped me, then I'll answer next week. So another question I've had is, was the Icone consecration valid? Yes, sacramentally it was absolutely valid. We have no reason to doubt the validity of the apostolic succession that the Society inherited from Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. So Rome has always acknowledged and recognized and accepted the validity of ordinations and confirmations and indeed consecrations that the Society has performed. So there's no reason to doubt the validity of these bishops at all. Of course, there is, again, a distinction, a difference between sacramental validity and legality. Of course, by virtue of the excommunication, it's obvious that the Church initially regards the consecrations as illegal, or illicit, but illegality or illicit is not the same thing as invalid. So these are true bishops. They possess all that a bishop has the power to do. So to consecrate, to ordain, to confirm, etc. So there's no, it would be very foolish to question the validity of their consecrations. And again, just, an FYI for your information regarding canon law and the validity of sacraments. The presumption in canon law is always toward validity. In other words, it really has to be proven that a sacrament is invalid, and it is upon the accuser to provide the proof and the evidence. Not a lot of people know that, but that is the case. In canon law, it is up to the accuser to provide the evidence, but otherwise, invariably, sacraments are presumed to be valid, unless, of course, there is an obvious reason to doubt them. But that's why, for example, Rome still recognizes most Old Catholic consecrations, meaning by the Polish National Catholic Church in the US, of male ordinands and consecrans of the Utrecht Union, why Rome recognizes Old Roman consecrations and ordinations, invariably. But of course, and of course, the Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox consecrations and ordinations and sacraments are regarded as valid, sacramentally valid. But where there is obvious doubt, for example, with Anglican orders, Anglican holy orders, which was a doubt before the ordination of women by various Anglican churches. The doubt about Anglican orders goes back to Leo the 13th and his document Apostolicae Curae, where after an investigation into the Anglican orders, he determined that for Catholic purposes, they were null and void. Null and void. And it's interesting how many people don't understand the argument, the judgment that Leo XIII gave. You will find many people, including at the time the Anglican archbishops of Canterbury and York, who responded with their own treatise, their own document called Sapius Officio, but where they argued at cross purposes, really, to Leo's main point of contention, which was around the manifestation and clear expression of Catholic intention. So if you've ever witnessed a Tridentine episcopal consecration like those we saw at a cone, or ordinations as we regularly see with the Society and other institutes, everything that goes on in that liturgy has a purpose and has a significance. And compared to the liturgy that the Anglicans were using in the 19th century and for much of the 20th century, there's no comparison between what's called the Edwardine ordinal in the Book of Common Prayer for the ordering of deacons, priests and bishops in the Anglican Church, with the liturgy, the very involved liturgy of the Tridentine Rite. In fact, the only thing that they both share is the laying on of hands. And Leo's point was that to be absolutely certain of the intention, the liturgy is surrounded by signs and symbols that manifest and express that intention, so that it is clear, the Tridentine rite of ordaining a priest. It's very clear that the priest is being ordained to offer sacrifice. Now, that is something that is both deliberately missing from the Edwardine ordinal, being, of course, heavily influenced by Protestant theology, but also the missing liturgical action, so that, in the Tridentine rite of ordination, the priest is presented with the chalice and paten. That is missing from the Edwardine ordinal, so that it's not clear for what purpose the priest is being ordained for. In the Tridentine rite, he's clearly being ordained to offer the holy sacrifice of the Mass. In the Edwardine ordinal, that's not clear. It's not said. It's neither said nor expressed liturgically. And of course, the Book of Common Prayer contains 39 articles of religion, in which the Mass is described as a sacrilegious blasphemy. The very concept of the very concept of the Catholic Mass is considered a blasphemy in the Book of Common Prayer. So, of course, Leo XIII's point was, well, your liturgy doesn't express what, the Church's intention and purpose for ordaining a priest is, but not only that, the very book in which your ordinal is contained, dismisses, refutes, anathematizes, almost, as it were, the very concept of the notion for which a priest is ordained. So you can't then argue that you have the same intention that the Church has always had, which is what is necessary for a sacramental intention. Now, another question just in. God bless you, Janet. Thank you. What are your thoughts on the consecration of a bishop by the Transalpine Redemptorists, scheduled for the 26th of this month? Well, Father Michael Mary, I think that's the name of the superior who is going to be consecrated. He originally was he originally was with the mainstream Redemptorists, if I have this right, but sought ordination from Archbishop Lefebvre, transferred kind of to the society in order to found a traditional Redemptorist congregation, which of course he subsequently did, which are now known as the Transalpine Redemptorists. They are based in Papastronze, an island off the extreme north coast of Scotland. And he's always struck me as a sincere and genuine soul. Over the years, he's given many spiritual conferences, which you can find on YouTube and on their website. He's a very sound man, and so is his co-founders and his confreres. And of course, they were they reconciled with the Holy See. I can't remember the date, but over a decade ago. And were brought in to and recognised by, I think it's the Diocese of Aberdeen, technically where they're situated, and became part of the mainstream conciliar synodal church. Then they grew. They established a house in New Zealand, and that did very well until there were allegations and complaints made about exorcisms. The local ordinary, the local bishop, took a fright and ordered the Redemptorists out of his diocese. Well, initially he suspended them. He forbade them to serve Mass for people. And then the case was sent to Rome, and I can't remember if it was wholly negative. Something tells me that it wasn't all in the bishop's favour, but anyway, they retreated from New Zealand back to Scotland. And then earlier this year, and we covered it in Nunciatoria. If you don't know, our regular newsletter, which usually comes out on a Friday, but is dated for the following Sunday, nunciatoria.org. I shall put it in the show notes. Sorry. Oh, it is. Yes, it's in the address is in the show notes. If you search on there for Transalpine Redemptorists or Papastranzae, everything we've reported, everything we've studied about them will appear. And then, as I say, earlier this year, they announced that after great deliberation and purposeful study, they had concluded that, well, they were adopting the sedevacantist thesis or position, that they concluded that the errors of contemporary Rome are so great that they concluded the Holy See must be vacant. And subsequently now, Father Michael Mary is due to be consecrated by Bishop Pierre Roy from Canada, who is a Took line, sedevacantist bishop. And what's interesting about that is that Bishop Roy earlier this year announced a proposal for a imperfect general council. There's not. I don't really want to get into the weeds about it, but the idea broadly is to bring traditional Catholics together, and as Bishop Roy says, not necessarily to address the papacy. So there is there are, obviously, when people discuss sedevacantism, one of the things that people wonder about is, well, if the Holy See is vacant, how long can it be vacant for, and how will it be replenished? How can a new pope be elected if all the if candidates are likely to be heretics, or if the cardinal electors are considered heretics, etc. And it's the issue largely is this notion that exists in canon law that a manifest heretic ipso facto loses his office, and in fact technically is outside the church. And essentially that is the sedevacantist thesis concerning the popes, the post-conciliar popes. But Bishop Roy has come up with an invitation to traditional Catholic bishops to come together and discuss the situation, discuss the crisis in the church. Now, I haven't looked at the Unam Sanctam website recently. I don't know if any of you have, to see how many bishops have now expressed an interest. But I know some who have, and I think everyone is not so concerned with the idea of conclavism, with the idea of electing a new pope. But I think everyone sees the the sense and the opportunity for traditional Catholic bishops to come together, which, I think is a positive step, is a good thing, because we're not very good at traditional Catholic bishops at playing together nicely. Quite how many, thank you, Father Marcel in the Philippines is online with us. Thank you, Father. So there are 13 bishops now on the list. So we'll see. A date, no date or anything has been set for the imperfect General Council. There are issues, with the notion. The imperfect General Council comes from an idea that, what would, how would you vote a new pope if all the cardinal electors have been killed, etc. It's a kind of, in an extreme situation, how would you vote? How would you get a new pope? And an imperfect council, an imperfect general council was suggested. I forget now by which theologian or canonist, but the original concept was that the imperfect general council, that the general council would consist of bishops with jurisdiction. And I know that Bishop Sanborn, who is a sede-privationist bishop, Bishop Sanborn has said that, has dismissed the idea of the imperfect General Council on the basis that it's supposed to be of bishops with jurisdiction, and which, of course, no traditional Catholic bishop has technically jurisdiction in the ordinary sense. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, what are my thoughts then on Father Michael Mary's consecration? Well, though I am myself invariably cautious about such things, we do need traditional Catholic bishops. There's a reason why the society took the risk and the step that it did to consecrate 4 new bishops. Generationally, age is not quite, but will soon become an issue. We pray, of course, that everyone will live long, but you never know. So we do need more bishops. People often, of course, criticize by saying, but well, there's not enough traditional Catholics for more bishops. But actually, part of the problem is location of traditional bishops. So I'm down here, literally at the extreme southeast of the UK. Bishop Michael Mary, as he will become, will be in the extreme northwest of the UK in Scotland. And there is nobody in between. There is a resistance bishop in Ireland. And sorry, and of course there is another resistance bishop in London, in Wimbledon. Resistance bishops, if you don't know, there was Bishop Williamson, Richard Williamson, who I'm sure you must know if you're a traditional Catholic. He was eventually expelled from the Society of St. Pius X, and so were others, sporadically, and they came together and formed what's called the resistance, which Bishop Williamson resisted being formed into any kind of society, whereas others thought that they should be organized into something corporate. Bishop Williamson resisted that, but he did himself then consecrate bishops to serve, mainly to serve in other places, because he was the eldest of the 4 bishops consecrated by Lefebvre. So he consecrated, I think the final count was 7 bishops for the loosely known resistance. One of whom, of course, is based in London, another in Ireland. So that only gives you 4 traditional Catholic bishops in the UK. Now, if you think how many souls potentially there are, so I think last count, well, I think we're not quite 70 million yet population in the UK, but approaching that. I think it's 68, something like that, which compared to other places is nothing. One of the things that surprised me on one of my visitations to the Philippines was that was the huge population numbers. Manila is something like 26 to 28 million souls, but so are the 5 cities surrounding Manila. They also have about between 25 and 30 million souls each there as well. So that's also already they've beaten the population of the UK. But we have to remember, as I said, yesterday in Unscripted, if we have any reason to exist at all, it is for the salvation of souls. And there are plenty of souls. There are enough souls that need saving. So we do need more bishops. We need more priests too. And of course, we need more faithful to serve. Ideally, of course, modernism would phase out from the entire church, but that doesn't seem possible for the foreseeable. I'm sorry to disappoint anyone, but I don't think Leo is going to be the great Orthodox Pope that we sorely need. He seems very committed to the Francis era agenda, and certainly seems to be following those policies. So there we are. So I welcome, I tentatively welcome the consecration of Father Michael Mary. I'm fairly confident that as a bishop, he will remain his humble pastoral self. there is always a slight fear. We call it amongst ourselves purple fever. You do sometimes get men who suddenly transform into monsters, but you know, the gift and the grace is experienced differently, I suppose. But you know, hopefully, he will remain his pastoral and humble and spiritual self. And the second part to Janet's question is, will he face the same decree as the SSPX? Technically, yes. Again, because the Redemptorists have only just, as it were, earlier this year, left the synodal church. In fact, I don't know if a canonical determination has already been made or a decree issued about the status of the Transalpine Redemptorists, but certainly one is no doubt waiting, because they were erected, I think, as being of diocesan right, and so I'm pretty sure that the Bishop of Aberdeen will be looking to withdraw that status, that canonical status, if he hasn't already. But which means that Father Michael Mary's association with the synodal hierarchy is relatively close and recent. So I'm pretty sure that he will be issued with not just the automatic excommunication, but it will be decreed administratively as well. Fairly certain that, again, the Bishop of Aberdeen will want to do his best to prevent the faithful served by the Redemptorists from continuing to attend Mass and support their apostolate. So, yeah, I imagine another decree will be issued about Father Michael Mary. And likewise, Bishop Pierre Roy. I don't know if a decree was formally given about his own consecration, but I'm pretty certain that, fairly sure, that he would be named in any decree issued against Father Michael Mary. The difference, of course, though, is Father Michael Mary will not be appealing to Rome afterwards, because, as I say, they believe the Holy See to be vacant. Any other questions? Otherwise, I can continue with some of those that I received before. Somebody asked, did the new bishops receive jurisdiction? So although episcopal consecration confers the fullness of holy orders, it does not by itself assign a diocese or canonical office or ordinary jurisdiction to the recipient. So in the strictest sense, no. The 4 new bishops did not receive jurisdiction. They received the power to govern, of course, by virtue of the episcopate itself. So they are, ready to go if subsequently the Pope wished to give them a canonical missio and jurisdiction. they're ready to receive that, but by virtue of being consecrated, no, they don't receive jurisdiction. And of course, the society has been very clear that it was not their intention to consecrate these bishops for any kind of jurisdictional authority or to claim any kind of jurisdiction. They are they are literally to be used as sacramental machines, for want of a better analogy, but they've been consecrated to ordain and confirm and consecrate for the needs of the faithful that attend the society's missions. So no, they didn't receive and won't receive, I suspect, any kind of jurisdiction. Now, Father Marcel asks, do you think the Church should expect an Orthodox Pope in this lifetime? Well, I actually said last evening on Unscripted, I'm no longer sure. For many years, I thought it might be possible, especially if we'd have had someone similar to Benedict after Benedict. I think I thought then that would have been hopeful, but now after Francis and after Leo, and Leo of course could be 20 years as Pope. He was 68, I think, at his election. There's no reason to doubt that he might live 20 years or more. He's in good health. So that rather puts back the prospect of an Orthodox Pope. There are signs, there are positive signs. We're reliably told anecdotally that the new generation of young priests and seminarians are more orthodox and traditionally minded. Of course, some of them are having to play the game, not give themselves away as being as being orthodox or being persuaded to tradition. But there is growth for the various former Ecclesia Dei communities, like the FSSP and the Institute of Christ the King, etc. They have vocations. So who knows? Maybe in 30 to 40 years, or more, an Orthodox Pope may arrive. But sadly, I don't think in my lifetime. Maybe in yours, Father, because you're considerably younger than I. So maybe in your lifetime, just. But I don't think in mine, sadly. But who knows? As Gabriel said to Our Lady, anything's possible with God. So who knows? Leo may yet convert, which is why, as faithful Catholics, we should pray for his conversion. Pray for the conversion of all. Well, we should be praying for each other's conversion all the time. And by conversion, I mean fidelity to the faith and to the pursuit of holiness and heaven. Of course, we should be praying all the time for each other's conversions, which is, an ongoing process. That's our attitude. That's our understanding as Catholics, in contrast to our Protestant brethren. It's not a once and only once done deal. It's a process of ongoing theosis, of divinization, of sanctification, of conversion of heart and mind and will toward God. So we should pray for Leo. We should pray for all the hierarchy, and we can do so without in any way seeming to compromise our position or stance on anything. It's a wholesome Christian charitable thing to do. It is, a work of mercy. So pray, brothers and sisters, pray for the conversion of those in high office, that they may see the light of tradition and orthodoxy and turn things around. You never know. We saw, I think, something of that in Pope Benedict. He wasn't the best thing since sliced bread, but comparatively, he was the better pope of the popes since the council. And although, he was a periti, one of the theological consultors at that council, and in his youth, radical, I think we saw, as his pontificate progressed, and indeed before his election, I think we saw that the light of tradition and orthodoxy was coming to him, and certainly his release that he gave to the traditional mass, I think, was indicative of that. And we're told, again anecdotally, but we're told that one of his regrets was not having been able to bring about the complete reconciliation of the society with Rome. But, of course, then as now, the same doctrinal issues persist. The same cause and the reason, again, for our existence remains. So I don't think we'll see an Orthodox Pope anytime soon, unless we, all of us, do our best to pray for the enlightenment of tradition and orthodoxy to the present occupant of the Holy See. Another question I received: did the consecrations automatically create a new church? This is the suggestion of parallel jurisdiction. So again, just as the new bishops didn't receive any kind of jurisdiction, neither is the purpose or intention of the society to create another church. Now, if the society had desired or meant or intended by these consecrations to create a parallel hierarchy, a parallel jurisdiction, then of course they would be rightly accused of schism. But again, they manifestly stated that was never and not their intention. And so no new church, no new ecclesial body was created by the consecrations. Another question: is every act of disobedience to the Pope an act of schism? No. Expressly no. Otherwise, every cleric who disobeyed a papal or episcopal command would cease to be Catholic. Schism involves something very specific: the refusal of papal submission or ecclesiastical communion. And again, the society expressly said that that wasn't their intention. So no. You can be, well, and again, I mean, I reflected on this on Monday evening in the spiritual conference. The mystical body belongs to Christ, not to Peter. By which I mean that, for example, when there is a papal interregnum, the church doesn't cease to exist. She is still sustained by God and his grace because she is the mystical body of Christ. It's only the visible head on earth that is the role of the Pope in an interregnum that is missing. In other words, the church's existence does not depend on Peter. Does not depend on Peter. However, the church's constitution, of course, divine constitution, requires Peter, requires a visible head, but when there isn't one, the church doesn't collapse. So contrary to, some people will say, oh, well, if the Pope has cut them off, then that's it, they're gone. Or if he declares them schismatics, then they're no longer Catholic, etc., etc. But that's not necessarily true. That's not strictly speaking true. And as we said at the very beginning, the SSPX now is presenting their recourse, challenging that very notion. And it's a due canonical process. And nobody's inventing anything. Canon law allows for this, and chiefly allows for it because actually the Pope did not actually himself excommunicate the bishops. The dicastery for the doctrine of the faith and Cardinal Fernandez, who of course do act theoretically in the name of the Pope, but they administratively issued the decree of excommunication, and Cardinal Fernandez signed it, not the Pope. Neither was the decree issued by the dicastery in forma specifica, which means at the Pope's personal behest. That's an important point. The decree was issued because the penalty had been automatically incurred by the act of the irregular consecrations. But Pope Leo, they didn't issue the decree because Pope Leo had told them to. So although, everything in the Curia is technically done in the name of the Pope, but there is a difference when the Pope is directly involved or not. So that's why this is an administrative decree, and why there is recourse to appeal. Now, technically speaking, if the Pope had himself personally issued it, that would be a different matter, because according to canon law, there is no appeal to a sentence or a judgment issued by the Holy Father. But I would say even then, you know, again, the overriding principle of canon law is the salvation of souls. And if somebody was suitably penitent enough, I'm pretty sure a pope would hear their plea. But for the purposes of what's being said online at the moment, it's an important distinction. It's an important nuance to point out that actually the administrative decree was not issued by the Pope's command or by him personally. So all those people are running around saying, yeah, well, if the Pope's cut you off, blah, 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 that's nonsense. It doesn't actually apply to this situation. But otherwise, generally speaking, disobedience, people are disobedient all the time without saying or without implying that they no longer are recognizing authority. When a child disobeys a parent, we don't say, oh, well, automatically then now he has no parents. Or, if at work, if your boss tells you to do something at work that is illegal or not part of your contract or contrary to your terms and conditions or whatever, you can refuse, But just saying no or being disobedient doesn't necessarily mean you're saying, well, I no longer recognize you as my boss, unless you actually say, I quit. But so it is with the church and with the church's hierarchy. It's possible, and people do behave disobediently without withdrawing recognition of the validity or the office of their superior. So again, it's a relevant and important nuance. Now, I'm just going to take a little break. By a little break, I mean less than a minute, just to take some refreshment. So, for those of you who've just joined us, or you may have joined us a little while ago, but haven't worked out what's going on. This is a live Q&A, questions and answers. You ask the questions, and I will attempt to give you answers. Primarily about the situation regarding the Society of St. Pius X and the excommunications and the consecrations, but not necessarily. You can ask me a question about the crisis in the church, about traditional Catholicism, whatever. So I'm going to take a little break to have a swig of water, and then we'll come back to it. Don't go away. And we're back. So another question I received was, what does the SSPX mean by a state of necessity? So, of course, the Society argues that the doctrinal, liturgical, and vocational crisis is so grave that extraordinary measures are required to preserve traditional priestly formation, confirmations, and ordinations. Now, necessity in canon law is not merely inconvenience, frustration, or disagreement. It must involve a grave danger to persons or to a genuine good that cannot reasonably be protected by ordinary means. Now, that's important because a lot of people, I think, don't understand why the Society has done what it's done. You'll hear a lot of people say, well, there are lots of bishops in the world already, why do we need more? Others will say, well, you know, the FSSP and the Institute of Christ the King, they have ordinations every year. They manage to find bishops for that, and they don't have any bishops themselves. And of course, you know, read the FSSP because they were, when they were founded, they were a group of priests that left the Society of St. Pius X after the 1988 consecrations to found a new society, and they were promised the same conditions that were offered to Archbishop Lefebvre when he was still in negotiations with Rome ahead of the consecrations for a bishop to succeed him to look after the society. Now, it's an important thing there to recognise that both in 1988, Rome itself took the argument that Archbishop Lefebvre should have a successor, should have a bishop as a successor to look after and support the apostolate of the society. People overlook that, but you know, why else were they negotiating? And if you look at how and what they were negotiating, it was all about they conceded that the society should have a bishop to perpetuate its ministry. So that deal, as it were, was supposed to have been then given to the FSSP. So in other words, that those who had left Lefebvre, who created the Society of St. Peter, would in due course receive a bishop. And of course, 38 years later, still no bishop. And that's part of the reason why the Society hedged its bets, as we might say, with regard to their petition for a mandate for these consecrations, because again, although Rome, I think in previous talks had given some kind of acknowledgement or concession that bishops would be needed for the society, were the society reconciled. But there remains, of course, you know, a distrust is probably the best term to use. A distrust of the society regarding Rome because of how Marcel Lefebvre was treated, and how, you know, the way negotiations have gone on since, you know, before, you know, everyone in 2012, which is, you know, Bishop Williamson, of course, disagreed, but in 2012 they thought some accommodation might be achieved with Rome. As I said earlier, Benedict was very keen for that. But again, at the last minute, it was Cardinal Muller who actually scuppered things. Archbishop Pozzo was in the news last week about this because he gave an interview and it was published on Rorate Caeli, where he was supposedly giving some context to previous negotiations with the society. And let's say, let's use the phrase that Her Majesty the Queen used regarding that controversy with Meghan Markle. Recollections may differ. And for sure, recollections differ between Archbishop Pozzo's account and the society and others, including Cardinal Muller, who already admitted before that his last-minute intervention in those negotiations in 2012 ruined the talks, ended the talks. What did he do? Well, he did exactly the same thing as Cardinal Fernandez also did. So remember that in February there were negotiations, and then Cardinal Fernandez said, "Oh, and you must accept the council and the legitimacy of the Novus Ordo and blah, blah, blah." And Father Pagliarani said, "Okay, thanks for the conversation," and left. And that's exactly what happened in 2012 with Cardinal Muller. Everything actually to that point, everybody says, was going quite well. And then out of the blue, Cardinal Muller suddenly said, "And you must accept the council and you must accept the legitimacy of the Novus Ordo, blah, blah, blah." And everything ended. Now, you might say, well, why does that matter? I mean, why would that be why would that be an issue? Well, from the society's perspective and from a traditional Catholic perspective, of course, there are various issues that we have with the council, and particularly after the council, and certainly with the promulgation of the new Mass, etc. Now, I think to an extent, most of us who would prefer a reconciliation with Rome would be perhaps, with certain guarantees about preserving our spirituality and our charism and our apostolates, etc. Broadly speaking, would desire reconciliation with Rome, but we would want to be able to discuss the proverbial elephant in the room, which are those aspects of the post-concilio magisterium that seem at odds with the perennial magisterium, that is, with the supposed new teachings compared with where they contrast with the past. Now, if an accommodation could be reached where we would be allowed, as it were, to have those conversations, then I think reconciliation would be more likely. But as I say, Muller and now Fernandez insist on this acceptance of Vatican II. And the question is, well, what does that mean? What does acceptance mean? Does it mean broadly just to nod and recognise that it was an ecumenical council and a legitimate ecumenical council, and I think most of us could do that. Even Archbishop Lefebvre, participated in it and signed all the documents. It's possible, but or do they mean you have to accept not only that the council is legitimate, but everything about it you must accept too. So all the new ideas, all the new theologies, all the post-conciliar developments, etc., all of the whole package, you have to accept all of that as well. Well, that's a non-starter, I think. That's a non-starter for most traditional Catholics. We couldn't do that. So it depends what acceptance of Vatican II means. Legitimacy of the Novus Ordo, again, what does that mean? Does that mean recognizing the canonical legality of it? Does it mean, is it referring particularly to the promulgation of the Novus Ordo, which is questionable? Is it referring to broadly the legitimacy of the new Mass as a Catholic rite? Again, what does it mean? What does it mean to accept Vatican II? What does it mean to recognize the legitimacy of the Novus Ordo? Bear with me 1 second. A frog in my throat, as we say here. It's what does all that mean? So, necessity. From the traditional Catholic perspective, of course, there is a state of necessity to preserve the traditional Mass, but not just the Mass, the traditional faith. We can discuss and iron out developments but we need space to do that. But what none of us could do in good conscience is just blanket accept and treat as bona fide everything of the council. And of course, this is a condition that nobody else has to accede to. It's not as if, when Pius X required the oath of modernism, that all seminarians and ordinands and consecrants today, after the council, have to sign, something or an oath to say that they accept Vatican II. They don't. So why should anyone else? Why should traditional Catholics have to do that? And that begs the question. I mean, that actually demonstrably proves the state of necessity, because that's actually, they know that the council, or at least the post-conciliar magisterium is questionable. Otherwise, why make it a condition? But in that, they're also saying that there is a difference. There clearly seems to be a demarcation between post-conciliar and pre-conciliar. And that, of course, as traditional Catholics, is exactly our point. So that's essentially what the society means by a state of necessity. You know, as traditional Catholics, we need to preserve and perpetuate tradition and the perennial Catholic faith. You know, and it's not, as so many people think that it is, about aesthetic preferences. You know, it's not that we prefer the old mass because it's more reverent and more dignified and more beautiful and more, you know, aesthetically pleasing compared to the Salzir of the Novus Ordo. It's not that at all. Because, you know, some people do. You know, you can dress up the Novus Ordo to look like a Tridentine liturgy. You know, that's you know, a la Brompton Oratory. Their main mass on a Sunday morning at, I think it's 11 o'clock, is a sung mass in Latin, but it's all the new rite. It's all the Novus Ordo, but it is offered ad orientem, facing east. They even have two deacons, so it looks like a high mass with so they have a celebrant and two assisting deacons. But visually, of course, aesthetically, visually, it looks like a Tridentine high mass because there are three ministers at the altar. They have, you know, beautiful traditional music. They sing, you know, Tallis, Palestrina, Haydn, Mozart, etc. They even sing Gregorian chant propers, clouds of incense, oodles of acolytes and servers. Yes, you know, as a spectacle, it looks beautiful. You know, if anyone can demonstrate how to make the Novus Ordo look reverent and dignified, it's the Brompton Oratory. But of course, the problem with the new Mass is more than just the ascetics. It's that it doesn't convey the wholeness of the Catholic faith. In contrast to the Tridentine rite, which does. And also the fact that, you know, the Novus Ordo is not an organic development of the Latin rite. You know, the Tridentine rite, the Latin rite. I say Tridentine, you know, it's not the Tridentine rite. It is the Latin rite, the perennial Latin rite. It was simply codified by the Council of Trent, and only in the sense of being the preferred standard rite of the liturgy of the Church. But, you know, as a rite, as a liturgy itself, it is, you know, developed organically over 1,500 years or more. It was never conceived of by a committee, nor even a pope. At various times, like you know, the Council of Trent and St. Pius V. Yes, of course, popes at various times have intervened, as it were, to correct errors, or to correct rubrics, or standardize rather than correct, to standardize rubrics or standardized forms, or accidentals, or the propers of the Mass. But you can't, with the Tridentine Rite, you can't point at a specific date in time and say that's when it came into being, or that's how it came to be what it is today. It all grew, it all developed organically. Whereas, of course, with the new Mass, it was created by committee, literally by committee, and and it was developed really from concepts of liturgical scholars. So it's a bit of a hybrid, the new Mass. So although there are similarities, although you can draw parallels between the new Mass and the old Mass, if you sit down with a hand missal for either rite, there are bits where you can recognize, oh, that's the offertory, or there's the Gloria, or whatever. But actually, the way the new Mass was put together was done by committee, was a work of theologians and so-called liturgical scholars, and it's a hybrid. So it is, it retains some of the prayers of the old Mass, but it introduces prayers from other rites, and even other traditions, like, for example, as I said last week, the offertory prayers in the new Mass are actually taken from Jewish sources, from Talmudic sources, specifically from table blessings. If you ever to attend a Sabbath supper in a Jewish home, you would hear the same words, "Blessed are you, Lord God of all creation." It's where it comes from. So again, while while the issue is not the Mass alone, it is about the faith, but the Mass and the faith are intrinsic to each other, whereas the new Mass and the new doctrine are not. In other words, as a Catholic, and believing that all that we do about what the Mass is and what it signifies, that is all encapsulated within the Tridentine Rite. Whereas with the Novus Ordo, it is not immediate, it is not obvious, and to some extent you have to gild it to make it appear solidly Catholic. And certainly in contrast to the Tridentine Rite. Now, as I say, it can be done. The Brompton Oratory is probably the exemplar par excellence of how it can be done. But even then, that would be, that's all aesthetics. That's all beauty and accidentals. Yes, you can beautify it, but it doesn't alter the fact that doctrinally it is not as demonstrable of the Catholic faith, of the perennial Catholic faith. Okay, well, that's 2 hours now. I think that's long enough for you and even for me. Um, uh, I hope this has been interesting. At least a dozen of you have appeared to stay for most of it. So I hope it was useful and of interest. If it provokes more thought and questions, then remember I will be here next week. And I will only do this as long as it is thought to be useful. So do think about that. If you think it would be a pointless exercise, then let me know. But I think there is, specifically now, after the brouhaha of ECHO, I think it's important that as traditional Catholics, we utilize the technology to better able inform and support each other. Thank you, Joseph. So I shall be here next week. Meanwhile, think about it. Think of some questions. You can email them to me. ABP ampersand Selsey SELSEY.org. That's ABP at Selsey.org. Feel free to send me questions then, or just leave them as comments on this broadcast or any of our broadcasts, and someone will pick them up. Otherwise, of your charity, I would just draw your attention again to our appeal for the channel and for particularly for the daily mass broadcasts. For 18 years, we've provided this service willingly and for free, but such is the economic situation now, as I'm sure we're all aware. But in order for us to be able to continue particularly the daily mass apostolate, we really do need your help. So of your charity, if you are able to give anything towards that, we would be most grateful. We're still looking for larger donations initially, because things are coming to a head, as it were. But regular, smaller donations would also help in the long run to keep us going. As I said before, and as those of you who know me will know, I do not like discussing the sordid topic of coin, but I'm afraid needs must now. When, as they say, when the devil drives. So we need to stay on air. There are people who need the service we provide for the daily mass. So of your charity, please, as you are able, please consider giving and give generously to that appeal. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and please continue to support us by watching. Do like and share the broadcasts. But liking, the like button just down there is very useful, because the more likes we get, the algorithms that YouTube and social media employ will, allow others to find us. So it's very important to press the like button, and also to subscribe. So if you don't want to miss out on another episode, be sure to subscribe. Going forward, I mean, I will try to keep things consistent and regular, but the nature of, my ministry and of pastoral ministry means sometimes that there may have to be last minute changes to schedule. But if you click the notify me buttons on things, but if you click subscribe, you will always be notified when something is happening. So please do subscribe to the channel. And again, that helps with the algorithm. That encourages YouTube to send more people our way. Finally, I shall pray a blessing. In nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Sit nomen Domini benedictum, ex hoc nunc et usque in saecula. Adiutorium nostrum in nomine Domini, qui feci caelum et terram. Benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti descendat super vos, et maneat semper. Amen. God bless you. Thank you for watching. Until next time, take care of yourselves and of others, and stay faithful.